What is up, guys? 40 TV here. Today is actually Sunday. As you know, this is going to be a reaction video. So today I thought it was appropriate to go over some of the Bible Project's videos, starting with the book of Genesis. If you don't know much about the Bible Project, they kind of just do visual videos about the Bible. I tell a lot of my friends that I go to Bible studies and they say, why don't you just go to church? Why don't you just go to church? I ask them, like, okay, well, tell me anything about any book that you know from the Bible, obviously. And they, I don't know. It's not that deep, it's not that serious, blah, 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 right? But that's kind of why I'm making this video, is so that anyone who does watch these videos and goes to church and maybe doesn't know about any of the books, we can kind of learn together. I'm not necessarily a Bible expert at this point, as you may know. If you see any of our Bible studies, I ask a lot of dumb questions, only because we can, right? In a close friend group where we can be a little bit more ourselves, we don't have to be too formal about it. If you remember the first early videos, you saw how we were drinking, we were smoking, who knows what else we were doing behind the scenes. But the whole point of these videos is kind of just to, let's all be on the same page of what we're talking about. I want to start going to church, probably should have, since today is Sunday, but a bigger thing is, let's also know what's in the Bible, right? I know the church and the Bible, there's a lot of debate, which one is over the other, right? But that's not something that I want to get into right now. Something I do want to talk about is, if you were to know me, my personal life, I was drinking once minimum a week, and not even just drinking, but I was drinking, right? And I decided for Lent to give up alcohol and pretty much everything else. And I think I've been doing a pretty good job so far. About a month and a half clean off of everything. And one of the biggest things that kept me on this track was my growing relationship with God, right? Because I would always say to myself and other people, I could quit whenever, this isn't an addiction, but I never had a reason to quit. I never had a reason other than my own needs, my own selfish wants to stop, right? I just wanted it because I wanted it. You compare yourself to other people around you and you think, well, at least I'm not doing as bad as them, but I want to do as best as I can without looking at anyone else. So that being said, let's get into this video.
So the book begins with God taking the disorder and the darkness described in the second sentence of the Bible, and God brings out of it order and beauty and goodness. He makes a world where life can flourish. And God makes these creatures called humans, or Adam in Hebrew. He makes them in his image, which has to do with their role and purpose in God's world. So the humans are made to be reflections of God's character.
Something I always thought about before is, what does God look like? And I remember back in the day, I used to think, God could be literally anything, right? He could be maybe the image of anything. But then this phrase that we're looking at right here, that we're made in God's image, makes me realize maybe God looks way more like us. Because, they say God's everywhere, God can do anything. But God, by definition of what's being said right here, is God must look like a human, right? A human shape at least. Or else, what do you guys think they mean by we're made in God's image? In what way?
Up till now, God has provided and defined what is good and what is not good. But now God is giving the humans the dignity and the freedom of a choice. Are they going to trust God's definition of good and evil, or are they going to seize autonomy and define good and evil for themselves? And the stakes are really high. To rebel against God is to embrace death, because you're turning away from the giver of life himself.
I think that's great. I think that's a great little food for thought, right? It's not necessarily our faults, because we're designed the freedom to do whatever we want. But I say too many times that, people choose their own individual freedom. Like, they say my truth. My truth is this, and anything that goes against it, it means nothing to me because it's all about me. By definition, that's selfish, right? And what are we doing if we're just living for ourselves? Too many of us want to believe that we have all the answers, that we know everything, that our life choices have made us into this person that's capable to do things without God. Somewhere down the line, I was that person, right? I think we all were. But somewhere down the line, I just broke down. Life just beat it out of me that maybe I don't have all the answers, that maybe there's something higher than me, someone smarter than me. And obviously that's very true. Like, I'm not claiming to be smart at all, but on a much higher level, right? Someone way above us. And something I just don't like seeing personally is just all these I know it all people, not trying to throw any certain group under the bus. But there was this recent video on Jubilee that a doctor was discussing with this young lady. Who knows what her merits were, but she said basically something like, oh, I know you're a doctor, but I've done my own research, I've done my own thinking, and I'm not going to believe a single word you say because I am capable, right? And I'm sure she is, but I mean, the comparison is literally a doctor's telling you what's good or bad about whatever they were talking about, and she's saying, no, I know what I'm doing. That's the level of delusion we've got to by having that choice.
And so in chapter 3, a mysterious figure, a snake, enters into the story. The snake's given no introduction other than it's a creature that God made. And
side note too, sorry for pausing so much, but there's so much in the Bible, especially even in Genesis, it's so telling of our own human nature. A lot of stories in the Bible, especially the Old Testament, is, hey, this is what this person did. And then I don't want to say if you're smart, but if you're paying attention, you would know that, oh wow, maybe I've done something similar to that. I know people who've done or been in that situation, and maybe I shouldn't do that based on what I'm reading right now. Right. The first point being, having the freedom to do whatever we want, because we are allowed to do whatever we want.
And it becomes clear that it's a creature in rebellion against God, and it wants to lead the humans into rebellion and their death. The snake tells a different story about the tree and the choice. It says that seizing the knowledge of good and evil are not going to bring death, that it's actually the way to life and becoming like God themselves.
And back to this archetype of person that it irks me. People trying to be like God, people that say we are gods, that we have just as much power as God. And I mean, no better representation is literally in the first book of Genesis, or in the first book of the Bible, the snake telling you that you can't be like God. I wonder how many people would disagree with this. I mean, if you know the story, you know what's about to happen, but I wonder how many people genuinely would still back up this snake knowing what happens after.
The man and the woman, they suddenly realize how vulnerable they are. Now, they can't even trust each other. And so they make clothes and they hide their bodies from one another. The second casualty is that intimacy between God and the humans is lost. So they go and run and hide from God, and then when God finds them, they start this game of blame shifting about who rebelled first. Now right here the story stops, and there's a series of short poems where God declares to the snake and then to the humans the tragic consequences of their actions.
If you watch one of our Bible studies, I believe it was either a live one or one we recorded, something I noticed that when God came back into the Garden of Eden, they felt shame. They felt shame realizing that what they've done. And I think shame is a very powerful emotion that we feel. Because, we've all had embarrassing moments, right? Where, oh man, why did I do that? In third grade, whatever, we still think about it. But I think shame is something useful for us to go from feeling bad about ourselves to being able to correct it and never doing it again. Unfortunately, I think it is also human nature to 10 people told me not to do it, but I'm going to do it anyways. And then they're going to realize, oh, that's probably why they were telling me, when you could have just avoided everything from the beginning.
God first tells the snake that despite its apparent victory, it is destined for defeat, to eat dust. God promises that one day a seed or a descendant will come from the woman who's going to deliver a lethal strike to the snake's head.
This is why the Bible is so interesting. I'm not going to say the answer. There is a right person for this, right? That person is someone that we know. Bonus points if you know who it is.
Which sounds like great news, but this victory is going to come with a cost, because the snake too will deliver a lethal strike to the descendant's heel as it's being crushed. It's a very mysterious promise of this wounded victor. But in the flow of the story so far, you see this is an act of God's grace. The humans, they've just rebelled, and what does God do? He promises to rescue them. But this doesn't erase the consequences of the humans' decision. So God informs them that now every aspect of their life together, at home and out in the field, it's going to be fraught with grief and pain because of the rebellion, all leading to their death. From here, the story then spirals downward. Chapters 3 through 11, they trace the widening ripple effect of the rebellion and of human relationships fracturing at every level. After this, we get an odd story about the sons of God, which could refer to evil angelic beings, or it could refer to ancient kings who claimed that they descended from the gods. And like Lamech, they acquire as many wives as they wanted, and they produce the Nephilim, these great warriors of old. Whichever view is right, the point is that humans are building kingdoms that fill God's world with violence and even more corruption.
There's a lot to unpack, even just the little bit that was said. Especially too, if this is your first time really getting a better understanding of the book of Genesis, it might be overwhelming. If my homie Rafa was here, he would know exactly what I'm talking about. We always kind of go back and forth with this issue.
In response, we're told that God is broken with grief. Humanity is ruining his good world, and they're ruining each other. And so out of a passion to protect the goodness of his world, he washes it clean of humanity's evil with the great flood. But he protects one blameless human, Noah, and his family, and he commissions him as a new Adam. He repeats the divine blessing and commissions him to go out into the world. And so our hopes are really high, but then Noah fails too, and also in a garden. He goes and he plants a vineyard, and he gets drunk out of his mind. And then one of his sons, Ham, does something shameful to his father in the tent. And so here we have our new Adam, naked and ashamed, just like the first. And the downward spiral begins.
The one thing, too, I will say about the book of Genesis is they do throw out a lot of, like this story of Noah and Ham walking in on him naked while he was drunk. If you never read the book of Genesis, you probably don't know what's going on. And the only problem with that is I don't want to go in depth into every single story, but essentially, because we were left to our own devices, you could even see that in today's period, because we are human, because we think we can do everything. Look at the world that we create, right? It's very, very away from God. So much so that at this point in time that God decided it was so unholy that the answer would be to just completely flood it. And I think a lot of people, especially those who are very sadistic, hopefully I'm using that word right, who would say, if God's so perfect, then why would he let this happen? Well, two things can be right at the same time. So God is perfect, and being left to our own devices, having the power for us to do whatever we want, we're not going to make the right choices. And I think that's what happened. If we were essentially robots programmed to worship God, I think there's not a lot of genuine love or reciprocation of love in that sense, right? I think real love is having the option to stray away from him, but choosing not to because we know what our hearts really want.
It all leads to the foundation of the city of Babylon. The people of ancient Mesopotamia, they come together around this new technology they have, the brick. And they can make cities and towers bigger and faster than anybody's ever done before. And they want to build a new kind of tower that will reach up to the gods, and they will make a great name for themselves. It's an image of human rebellion and arrogance. It's the Garden Rebellion now writ large.
I mean, think about how terrible of people we were once, right? Basically, our last Bible studies, we talked a little bit about this. I didn't record that one, but essentially, heaven up in the sky was supposed to be for those who truly lived righteous lives, right? And we're so rebellious, we're so whatever this would be, that instead of us trying to get there the righteous way, we defied God again by trying to build a tower going all the way up to Babylon. That was a Tower of Babylon. The tower trying to reach all the way up to heaven. And it really makes you think, like, why would we do that? Why are we so why are we fighting against God so much, right?
Now, this is a diverse group of stories, but you can see they're all exploring the same basic point. God keeps giving humans the chance to do the right thing with his world, and humans keep ruining it. These stories are making a claim that we live in a good world that we have turned bad, that we've all chosen to define good and evil for ourselves, and so we all contribute to this world of broken relationships, leading to conflict and violence and ultimately death.
Exactly. We are given, all the way back to Adam and Eve, we're given heaven. And the only rule is don't buy from this certain tree, right? Don't eat that fruit. And we went against him. And just every step of the way, every time we have the chance to make the right choice, we do the opposite. And unfortunately, that's just who we are as people, right? I'm not saying we can't change it. I'm not saying that's how it should be. But if you look at human history, even the Bible, it clearly illustrates that.
But there's hope. God promised that one day a descendant would come, the wounded victor who will defeat evil at its source. And so despite humanity's evil, God is determined to bless and rescue his world. And so the big question, of course, is what is God going to do? And the next story, The Hinge, offers the answer. But for now, that's what Genesis 1 through 11 is all about.
Sweet. So all the people go to church that are still watching this video, and we're about to get to the next part. I hope now, next time someone tells me, hey, why don't you just go to church? I want to be able to at least have a genuine conversation about Genesis. Let's get into part 2.
Question is, what is God going to do to rescue and redeem his world? Well, out of that scattering at Babylon, the author traces a genealogy of just one family that leads eventually to a man named Abram, later known as Abraham.
It's random, but anyone who has read Genesis, I know you know the struggles. It's when you're reading all the sons of the fathers and the sons, that's such a hard read. Shout out to anyone that actually gets through that.
Beginning of chapter 12 opens up a whole new movement in the story. God calls Abraham to leave his home and go to the land of Canaan, which God says will become his one day. And in that land, God promises to make Abraham into a great nation, to make his name great, and to bless him. So the question is, why is God going to bless Abraham and his family? And the last line of God's promise makes this clear. So that all the families of the earth will find God's blessing in you. Now, this is key for understanding the whole rest of the biblical story. God's plan is to rescue and bless his rebellious world through Abraham's family. And this is why the whole rest of the Old Testament story is just going to focus on this one family, eventually called the people of Israel. And ultimately, this is the promise that gets picked up by the later biblical prophets and poets who say that its fulfillment will come through Israel's messianic king, whose reign will bring justice and peace to all of the nations.
Who could that be? When we're in Bible studies, we have this it's a joke, but it's true. It's who's always the answer. Again, I'm not going to say it. I want everyone's brain cells to make the connections. Who do you think the Messiah is going to be?
Now, at this point of the story, none of that's clear. You just have to keep reading and watch the promise develop.
Something interesting, too. So the Old Testament was written before the New Testament, right? So imagine you're reading this book, and it's like, dang, someone's coming to save us. We don't know who. You have no idea what his characteristics, but someone's coming to save us, right? It makes me in awe how well written the Bible was. I mean, the Bible today, right? That it could kind of predict what was going to happen hundreds of years later.
The rest of the book focuses on Abraham and his family. First, Abraham himself, then his son Isaac, and then his son Jacob, and then Jacob's 12 sons. And the stories about each generation, they're united by two main themes. So first, each generation of Abraham's family is marked by repeated failure. They just keep making really bad decisions that mess up their lives and that put God's promise in jeopardy. However, God remains faithful to them. He keeps rescuing them from themselves and reaffirming his commitment to bless them and bless the nations through them despite their failings. So the Abraham stories. God had promised Abraham a huge family, but on two different occasions, he's afraid for his life because other men are attracted to his wife, and so he denies that he's even married to her.
I think we all know a person like this who would throw his wife or girlfriend or even friends in general under the bus. And we can all agree that those people are spineless, right? And again, I think this is why the Bible is so well written, because we know people like this. We know people in our own lives thousands of years later. You know, even when the narrator was talking, I'm sure someone came to mind when you thought about someone like this, right?
And not only that, Abraham and his wife Sarah, they can't have children. And so Sarah arranges for Abraham to sleep with one of their servant girls, which also creates all of these problems in the family. But each time, God bails Abraham out.
He bails us out every time, guys. Let's imagine this, your ex or a family member or whoever. How many chances are you going to give them after fucking up? Probably not that many. And God, over thousands of years, keeps bailing us out.
God invites Abraham to look up at the night stars and to count them. And he says, that's how numerous your family's going to be. And despite all of the odds, having no kids and no way to have any at the moment, Abraham looks up in the sky and simply trusts God's promise.
And that's big. That is big. I think we talked about it before in other Bible studies, how you can believe in God, but until you truly give in, it's a different feeling. And I'm sure when God first told Abraham that he's going to have a kid, in fact, there was a verse where he's talking with his wife about whether or not it was going to happen, because they were pretty old, and this time I think they were 100 plus years old. It seemed very unlikely, right? And not until this point where he finally just gave in fully is when he started to see the signs.
And God responds by entering into a covenant with Abraham, promising that he will become a father of many nations, that God's blessing may come to the whole world. God asks Abraham to mark his family with a sign of the covenant, circumcision of all the male boys in the family. This is a symbol to remind them that the fruitfulness of their family is a gift from God. And so Abraham has lots of kids eventually, and he dies at a good old age. Now, the Jacob stories play out these themes even more dramatically. From birth, Jacob lives up to the meaning of his name, which is deceiver. He cheats his brother Esau out of his inheritance and blessing, and he does it by deceiving his old blind father, no less.
Which is crazy. How do you name your kid after the word deceiver? Why would you do that in the beginning, right? It's almost like when Jesus still befriended Judas, knowing that he was going to get betrayed. But there's no way he knew, right? Why deceiver? Why not, not traitor? Or, you know what I'm saying.
He goes on to take 4 wives, even though he really only loves one, Rachel, and this creates all of these rivalries in the family. The only thing that humbles Jacob is being deceived by his uncle Laban, who cheats him out of years of his life. And so it's a humbled Jacob that returns to his homeland. And in a very strange story, Jacob ends up wrestling with God as he demands that God bless him. However, God honors his determination, and he passes Abraham's blessing on to him. And he renames Jacob as Israel, which means wrestles with God. Jacob loves his second to youngest son, Joseph, more than any of the others, and he gives him this special jacket. And the 10 older sons come to hate Joseph, and so they kidnap him, and they plan to kill him.
You would think Jacob would break that curse, that cycle of making sons jealous, but I guess some things really don't change.
And they decide to just sell him into slavery in Egypt, where he ends up in prison. But God is with Joseph, and he orchestrates Joseph's release from prison, and Pharaoh ends up elevating Joseph to second in command over all of Egypt. And so Joseph saves the nation of Egypt during a famine. And he also ends up saving his brothers and his family from starving to death. He says to his brothers, "You all planned this for evil, but God planned it for good, to save many lives." Now, these words are strategically placed at the end of the book because they summarize not only the story of Joseph and his brothers, but the book as a whole. From Genesis 3 onward, humans keep acting selfishly and doing evil, but this God is not going to leave his world to its own devices. He remains faithful and determined to bless people despite their failures. So remember, Genesis 3, God promised that this wounded victor would come and crush the snake and defeat evil at its source. And the author then connects this promise directly to the line of Abraham. This is a part of how God's going to bring his blessing to the nations. Now, from Abraham, this promise gets connected to Judah, the 4th son of Jacob. And this is how. In an extremely important poem in chapter 49, in aging Jacob, he's on his deathbed, he wants to bless his 12 sons. And when he comes to Judah, Jacob predicts that Judah will become the tribe of Israel's royal leaders, and that one day a king will come who will command the obedience of all the nations and fulfill God's promise to restore the garden blessing to all of the world.
Again, I'm not going to say the name, but we know who this is. Boom, there it is, guys. The book of Genesis. Hopefully, you guys stick around. It's a very important book. I mean, you can see the undertones. It's really setting up what's going to happen. The stories are written from the very first book. And the very first book was written ages before Revelations, which is the last book in the Bible. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure. Yeah, guys, it's basically human nature to mess up. I keep telling you guys I'm going to keep putting out videos more consistently. Here I am, 2 weeks delayed, but with God's grace, with God's help, we're going to turn this bad into good one way or another. And I want to leave you guys with this. Whatever you're going through in your life, no matter how bad it is. The issue with these Bible Project videos is they kind of go over the point of certain parts of Genesis super quick that you kind of don't realize that. I mean, imagine your own brother selling you into slavery to make anything. I mean, just to live at that point is a blessing, right? But he ended up being the ruler of Egypt, or second command of Egypt, ironically saving the brothers' lives that ended up sending him there in the first place. So wherever you're at in your life, as much as it sucks, as much as you don't want to be there, I promise you it's all going to be for a reason. It's all going to work out. You're going to look back at those days and realize that you wouldn't change them for the world. Alright guys, until next time.